Well, I went quite a while knowing that I was going to have this class, but as usual, I never do pick a specific subject until right at the last minute. I think on a lot of different ones. But this one, I thought maybe would go well. Last week, although we've got another one, that's good. Is he going to stay or not? I don't know. Last week I was down to a silver engraving symposium and workshop, and I was thinking down there about apprenticing and teaching workshops and things like that, and it kind of got me to thinking, well, what is teaching all about? And I know on first Saturday of every month we go to Glenn's and we have an evangelism class, which basically is teaching. And then I thought about some of the apprenticeships that I've went through over the years in silversmithing and braiding and saddle making and that. And that's teaching. And I was just thinking, how important is teaching in our lives? So I want to put a scenario to you. You're a Christian. You've been in a coma for 2 years. And you wake up. What's the first thing you want to do? Think about it. Because how you answer is going to tell what you're about. Think about that. You've been in a coma for 2 years. You're basically non-existent. You can't do anything. First thing you do when you wake up, what do you want to do? Well, I mean, besides the other simpler answers like getting up or eating or taking a drink or whatever, but what do you want to do with your life? Now, some people could say, well, I want to go back to work. Or I want to go hug my mother. Or I want to go order a pizza. I mean, think about that. Because it defines us. Now, think about Jesus spending 3 days in the tomb and then becoming alive again. What did he do? Because we're supposed to emulate him, right? He's our example. He's our perfect example. Turn to Luke 24. We're going to start in verse 13. We're going to read a few verses there. On the road to Emmaus. And we all are very familiar with this story. This is after the resurrection. This is after he has rose, stones rolled away, the women came, they seen he wasn't there, they seen the angel. So now we flash to this scene on the road to Emmaus. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it was just as the women had said, but him they did not see." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he was going to go farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearing evening, and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" After Jesus' resurrection, what did he do? He taught. First thing he did, he taught these two that were on the road. Is that what we should be doing as we go back to the question? Coleman, for 2 years we wake up. What does the Great Commission tell us to do? What is our purpose here on this earth as a Christian? Go into all the world, teaching them and baptizing them. Shouldn't that be our first obligation if we were given a second chance? What is our obligation now? We basically have been given a second chance, haven't we? Our first chance was going to hell because we sinned, and the wages of sin is death. He redeemed us. He reconciled us. And what is our first responsibility? What should it be?
Serve God and keep his commandments.
And that is going into all the world and teaching them.
That's his commandment.
Yep. And that's what we've been studying first Saturday of every month at Glenn's. Evangelizing. Going out into the world. Jesus made it pretty easy there, didn't he? Walking along, and they're talking, and you know, and I try to put myself in some of these scenes, and I'm thinking, what would that have been like, walking along, thinking about the things that have happened in the last week? An innocent man crucified. People that they respected, the chief priests, the Pharisees, the scribes, saying, "Crucify him." Now these were people that the Jews respected. And they said, "Crucify him," an innocent man. And I'm thinking, but he was supposed to be the king of Israel. This wasn't supposed to happen. You know, and they would be just like us, walking along and discussing the problems of the world and how can there be such injustice? And then someone comes up, "Well, what are you guys talking about?" I said, "Well, haven't you heard?" And after being that said, then he says, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." They should have known. They should have known. The prophets have spoken all of this, what was going to happen. Now, I can't imagine, they're walking with a guy that they don't even know, and they're talking about a man that was crucified. I'm sure that Jesus probably had his hands behind his back, because otherwise he would have been showing them the nail scars in his hand. They didn't know who they were talking to. But then he goes on and tells them, starting in the beginning. Do we look at this as a book about Jesus? Because it is. From the beginning to the end, it's a book about Jesus. So many times we say, "Oh, it doesn't start till Matthew before we start talking about Jesus." No. It starts in the beginning. He was there. And he reminds them. He's teaching them. Reminding them. Jesus taught in various different ways. Of course, a perfect example, we look in Matthew 13. He taught by parables. Those are some of the funnest ones that I like to look at. Because they're just down to earth, they're something that you can look at, you can apply, and they're easy to understand, for the most part. Now, some of them were a little complicated. Some of them he had to explain to the disciples what exactly he meant, but they were commonplace things. He taught by example. That's one that we try to do a lot of today, is teach by example. Set the precedence. I think a lot of times I think of an apprenticeship program as basically teaching by example. The ones that I've been to, it's hands-on. Okay, now here's how we're going to do this. And they show you. Now, not that it can't be learned from text, from slideshows or whatever, but hands-on has more effect, I think. I think a lot of times that we have a tendency to say, but I'm setting the example, therefore I don't have to open my mouth. Now, that's not necessarily what he says here. We set the example, but we need to teach. We need to preach. As it says. It doesn't say just go out there and act good. I mean, that's influential, yes. But we have to teach the good news, don't we? We have to teach the gospel. This is a perfect example with these two guys on the road to Emmaus, where he basically taught something that they already knew about, or they should have. I mean, he's reminding them. The prophets, they predicted this happening. They should have already known about that. And that's why he started in the beginning then, again, to remind them. When we are out teaching others, do we start from the very beginning, or do we kind of start where we feel is the best place to start? When we're teaching others, when we're amongst people, do we try to give them an idea of what we are all about by taking this book and starting from the beginning? Or do we just start willy-nilly wherever we think we ought to? Christ taught what was appropriate to the context of life. Whatever was happening, he took that as a starting place. Remember in John 8, starting in verse 1, where it talks about the men came to Jesus. They said, "We've caught a woman in adultery." He bends down, he writes in the sand. Then, of course, he does the great, the big quote, "Those that haven't sinned, throw the first stone." Well, then they just slowly leave. When what's left? Him and the woman. Now, he knew what she was. Now, he could have really laid it on her, couldn't he? He could have said how bad you are and all of this stuff. But what did he say? One simple sentence. Go and sin no more. He didn't overteach it, did he? Do we sometimes overteach? Do we sometimes want to get our point across so much that we tend to overdo? One sentence is all it took for her. Now, we don't know exactly what happened with her life, but I am just almost betting that she changed. And with just those simple words, go and sin no more. Another thing, as Christ taught, and this wouldn't be across the board, but a lot of times he didn't pick out the errors. Now, Granted, with the Pharisees and some of them that should have known better, he would point out the error of their ways. But for the most part, for the layperson, he didn't point out their errors. He wanted to give them an understanding of his teaching. Perfect example is the woman at the well in John 4. Let's look at that. Starting in verse 1. Well, actually, let's start in verse 4. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob was given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone on into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did all his sons and his flocks and herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to come back here to draw water." He told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true." "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that this place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship that you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said, "I know the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." Then Jesus declared, "I who speak to you am he." Multiple things that he could have pointed out to her that she was in error of. Multiple things. They were worshiping on the mountain. She had been married 5 times and with someone that she wasn't married with. He could have pointed out a lot of things. What was his main concern? He took what, as we said, the context of where she was at. She was at a well drawing water. Evidently, she was the only one. He, a Jew, is talking to a Samaritan, which, as it said there in the scripture, that was a no-no. They didn't associate. He takes the context of her drawing water because she's thirsty. They need water. He asks a question, "Would you draw me some?" And he goes from there and explains that I have something that you need. You'll be coming back, dipping in this well every day. But I have living water. See how he teaches? He takes what's at hand and yet makes a teaching session out of it to show her that she is in need of something. That there is more to this than just what you're doing every day. And I don't mean to dominate the conversation, because anybody that wants to make a comment, please do so. But I think of our example that's set before us. Write that down out here. In 1 Peter 2, verse 21. It says, "To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." We're to follow in his steps. Why? Because he suffered for us. What do we owe him? Everything. Everything. Because he suffered for us. He took our place on the cross. And then he has set the example before us, leading that perfect life of no sin. And then, after rising from the dead, going and teaching. The first thing he did was go and teach other people. Just as he told the disciples, go into all the world. Teach them. Baptize them. And I think, am I really doing what I need to be doing? I get up in the morning. My day starts. Cup of coffee, maybe two. Think about the work day. I mean, how often do we do that? What we're going to do that day. Got to be at work at 8. I got this appointment at 10. Oh, we got laundry to do today. I got to think about what we're going to do for the evening meal. We all make these plans, don't we? Do we ever start our day and say, Lord, put someone in my life that I can teach? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean your neighbor walking over or someone you meet on the street corner. If you're a parent, Glenn has 2 prime people. Kids. Teaching. Teach by example. Teach by parable. Teach by any way that you can. He has 2 prime examples that are there with him every day. Some of us that don't have kids. Maybe some that have grandkids with us. What do we do with our time? And I'll have to admit, I don't utilize my time the way I should. Because when it tells me in Matthew that I need to go out into the world teaching and baptizing them, I look at just last week. How many times did I do that? How many times did I have an opportunity to teach someone and didn't take it? How many times did I ask for God to give me an opportunity? There's times, I remember when someone called up at the building and needed some help, and I think Paul steered him Gary's way, and that was God putting somebody in your life. Whether it turned out good or not, it was an opportunity that you had to spread the word, to teach, to set the example. And I think, how many times do we miss those things? How many times does he put those things in our life and I'm too busy. I'm not the teaching type. That's the most common one right there. I'm not qualified. What do you mean you're not qualified? God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. I think we get it mixed up. He calls the ones that he wants, and he qualifies them at that moment, that they can do his will, that they can do his bidding, they can obey his commands. And I think too many times I'm not qualified to do that. Glenn's classes on Saturday
Ding.
point that out greatly to me. That I am qualified. I'm totally qualified. Anyone that is a child of God is qualified to teach. Because all you got to do is just tell them how you became a Christian. What you did. What you realized in your life. And all of these teaching simulations or whatever Christ used, whether it would be example or building on what they know, parables, stories of our life. All of those things can be used to bring someone closer. A lot of times we think, well, if I just invite them to church, I'll let somebody else do that. I'll let the preacher up there. He's the one that's qualified to do that. There's a reason they're in touch with you. Christ puts them in our lives each day. And it's whether we actually realize that they're there for that reason or not. I think too many times we want to just, they're good friends. I don't want to make them mad. Have we ever thought of that? They're good friends. I don't want to get on their bad side. I don't want to ruffle the feathers. Tell them I'm a Christian and this is the way I believe. They're still friends. They may turn against me. I think of where I came from. I was raised morally a good kid. And at 13, I gave my life to Christ. I said the sinner's prayer. And I was saved. Not. At 13, I didn't know. I didn't know. I thought I was good. My parents thought I was good. They were proud of me. But from that point on, then there was always something nagging. Always something, was that it? I mean, now I can just live like everything's okay? Tickets punched? Don't have to worry about anything? There was nothing said about obeying Him. You just had to live a good moral life. Each one of us has a story. It took from the time I was 13 till I was 29 years old to get it all figured out. And it took someone like Jill that was hard-headed enough to show me in the Scriptures and not give up before I realized that there was more to it. There was more to it than just saying the sinner's prayer, which is not in here. Accepting Christ into your heart, which is not in here. But that's what it was given to me. And then when you truly understand what He wants us to do, then you're excited about it. And I'm sure it's the same way that Jesus was excited about talking with these two on the road. Because He wanted to show them the truth. You've had it in the prophets. You've had it from the beginning. Believe it. Don't get discouraged. You know, they heard about the women going to the tomb and it was empty, and I'm sure that they were thinking, emotional women, that's just the way it is. You know, he's got to be around somewhere. He's setting them straight. This is what you need to believe. It was foretold. This was what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. We all have a story. Every one of us. And every one of them is going to be different. Where Gary came from is different from where I came from. Where Hubie came from is different from where I am. But we can all learn from those things. I know quite a bit of Glenn's story because it started here. But I don't know what was going on in his mind before that. I just know that he was seeking something when he came here. He knew something was amiss, and he was seeking it. And I think that's the key. We need to recognize those people that are seeking. There's a lot of people out there that are just kind of floating. They don't really care. They don't know where they're going, and they really don't care. Some of them say, I want to go to hell because that's where all my friends are. That's kind of a poor attitude, isn't it? I don't think I'd want to. I don't care if they were my friends. I don't want to meet them down there. But there are people out there that are truly seeking. People that have gone through tough times. And they think, how in the world can I get through this? And occasionally during them tough times, they curse God. Why are you doing this, God? There's reasons for God working in everyone's life, whether they're a Christian or a non-Christian. There's reason He allows things to happen. And I think the reason is so that it can get us to start teaching them. To start showing them that there is a better way than struggling. Not that we don't struggle as Christians. I still have flat tires. I still get in arguments. I still have bad thoughts. But if I didn't have Christ in my life, it'd be almost impossible to take. I don't know how people in the world do it. Because it's a struggle sometimes for me. And I'm thinking they have nothing to rely on but themselves. One of the key things, I think, in teaching as an example of Christ is that we need to start where the people are. First thing. Look at Christ and all of the teaching that He did when He was with His disciples. Even go clear back to when He was what? 14? In the temple. He's teaching them in the temple. Now, that's pretty bold. Because they were questioning, where did He get all of His information here? Who taught Him? And think about it. At 14, He's going in amongst these people that are high-minded, very religious. They know it all. And He's teaching them.
The Bible says He astonished them.
Astonished them. I mean, can you imagine? Would we be that brave? Would we? To go in amongst someone that supposedly knows it all. Could we astonish them with what we know from here? Think about that. Could we astonish them? Could we tell them something they didn't know? Or something that they refused to look at? We should be able to, because this is an astonishing book, isn't it? And we are supposed to live by it. Therefore, we should know it. I was on YouTube the other night, kind of doing perusing, and came across this quiz for Christians. Every Christian should know these questions, the answers to these questions. You know, and I thought, should I put myself on the spot? And I went through them. And luckily, I got them all right. But why should I have questioned myself? Why should I have? Is it because maybe I thought I might not know Him? I mean, to me, they were fairly simple questions. And I was kind of glad of that. But what if they would have been some harder questions? Would I have done so good? Would I have felt as good if I had only got half of them right? would it have convicted me that, you know what, I'm not spending enough time in here. And I'm spending too much time out there doing the things of the world. Because when I'm out there, I should be setting the example. I should be teaching by example. I should have a word ready. As it says, be prepared in season and out of season. It's real easy to be prepared here, isn't it? We can give the good word here. I'm doing it right now. But what about Monday through Saturday? Am I just as prepared? Do I have some knowledge that I can give to other people? Or do I just keep it to myself? I'm too busy. My schedule won't allow that. Jesus could have passed these two by. Could have went on to somebody else. He could have said, you know what, my work is done, and I'm not going to do any more. He could have. He fulfilled everything, didn't he? He suffered, he died, he rose again, he was done. I don't need to talk to anybody else. I told them I would come back. What if he never showed to the disciples? It's where he went after this. What if he said, I told him I was coming back. Why do I have to go back and reinforce it? Do we think that our time of teaching is over? We've gotten to that point of retirement. Now we're going to float. Where does it say anything about retiring from being a Christian? The only time we get to retire is when we go to heaven. Until then, we are on the clock. We're not going to get to punch our card until the end. He decides when the end is going to be. Otherwise, we're still on the clock. And he still has something for us to do. Teaching. I appreciate Glenn and Libby giving the time one day a month to help us in encouraging us to get the equipment and the knowledge to go into this world and teach. It's an encouragement to me. But we can have all of that set right before us and not partake of it. And what good did it do? I can go to an engraving clinic and I can have every tool before me, the latest and greatest, and have all the designs and everything laid out for me. But unless I take my hands and I start doing it, what good does that do? It doesn't do any good. I won't learn anything. It can be all set before me, but unless I partake of that, it does me no good. And I think it's the same way with us as Christians. We have everything right here before us. Everything is here that we need to live a godly life, to live an obedient life, a life of a servant to Christ. He tells us how to teach by his examples, all that he does. All that he showed, talking to the crowds, talking to the disciples, getting down on their level. He gives us all this. And says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to do the same thing I'm doing. I want you to talk to the crowds. I want you to go where the people are. I want you to get on their level. I want you to experience their life so that you can tell them what they need in their life. Do they need living water? Do they need the bread of life? Do they need to be a part of the vine and the branches? Is their faith like a mustard seed? All of these things in here are for us to utilize. And they're all set before us. And yet, so many times, we look at them on 1, maybe 2 days a week, And then the rest of the time we forget. We set it aside. We figure, I'm just not qualified to teach. Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We are qualified to teach anyone what's in here. Now, if we don't want to teach anything that's other than this in here, but everything is laid out before us, what we can teach others. Now, it may not be a deal where we can teach them and boom, they're baptized and we can say, yep, that's what I'm talking about. Some of you remember Bill Bratchkoff that was here preaching for 1 year. He told me a story that he went fishing Sunday afternoon with a guy for over 20 years, teaching him about God. Over 20 years. He took out his Sunday afternoon of napping or resting or whatever he was going to do. He took it out so that he could be with that man. Do we have that tenacity to teach? I mean, 52 weeks in a year, 52 times. Well, 10 years is 520 times with this guy, and he's not doing anything. He's not progressing. 20 years. He stuck with it. And guess what? He came to know the Lord. But what if he'd have gave up after 19 years and 51 weeks? He said, no, he ain't never going to turn. Missed opportunity. How many opportunities do we have to teach? And how often are we taking those opportunities to tell them our story? I think everyone in here is a Christian. Tell them our story. Tell them our story. How many of us know everybody's story in here? How many of us know how Roger became a Christian? I don't. How many of us know how Hubie became a Christian? I know he was in Catholicism. But I don't know what changed him. James has been around longer than anybody here. Do we know how he became a Christian? What his life has been like? We should know those things. These are our brothers and sisters. We should know those things. If we don't take the time to know our brothers and sisters, how are we going to take the time to teach others that aren't? That might be acquaintances or somebody that we don't even know. Taking the opportunity to learn from others what they have to teach us will help us teach others. What Hubie might have to say to me would give me an insight of someone that I might meet that might be in Catholicism. And it might give me an idea of what I can bring to the table to show them a better way. Not to put them down. That'd be the worst thing I could do. Put them down. You're Catholic. What are you thinking? That's not the way Jesus done it. Take them where they're at and show them a better way. It's what he did with multiple people. Showed them a better way. Good morning, Miles.
Morning.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, we are out of time, so I wish I could have went on for a little bit longer because I had a little bit more here, but I think we got the gist of it. Thank you much.